All right. Thank you all again for joining us. We are here to for the artist talk for Era of the Ancients, which is an exhibition that is at Artwork Center for Contemporary Art in Loveland, which is an amazing space. If you haven't been there before, I highly recommend that you visit to see this show before it closes, but also in general, they have amazing programming. And Sarah LeBaire will say a few words later. She's the executive director and curator, and she and her staff are amazing to work with, and they run amazing programs. So can't recommend them enough. As far as, I'd first like to thank some of our funders, which is the Colorado Creative Industries, Colorado Creates Grants, Fort Fund, and we have several donor advised funds that prefer to remain anonymous, but that have directly affect our programming. So this exhibition, featuring the work of Faris Belt, Natascha Seideneck, and Melanie Walker, came together as an offshoot of a program that we did last year, sort of exploring the way, looking at sort of environmental issues. And so this grew out of that, our last fall programming. And there was something that Melanie Walker said to me at some point last year, and she was talking about that we breathe the air of the ancients. So this idea of that we breathe the air of the ancients really stuck with me. And in light of all of the news that we hear and the weather events that most of us are experiencing, just thinking a lot about how the earth has been, in a certain form for a very long time, and that it's really been in the last couple of 100 years that we humans have begun to add things and create things that weren't part of all of those natural cycles, that weren't part of this, like the air that the ancients breathed, right? Now we have nanoparticles and forever chemicals and all of these things that weren't a part of our ecosystem or weren't a part of our world at all, and how those things have irreparably changed the cycles and the way that we will move forward. And so that's how the show came together. And of course, Natascha and Angela and Melanie, their work is so powerful in this realm. And so it just made sense for them to all be a part of this. It's also Women's History Month, so having an all women show was important. And of course, it's Month of Photography. And so having all of their work in exhibition right now is really important. So, and of course, Sarah LeBaire at Artworks Loveland, I proposed this. She was really excited about it, and so that was sort of gave us the go ahead, and that's how the show came together. So now I'm going to introduce the artists individually, and then once I introduce them, we will they'll each present on their work, and then we'll enter the sort of conversation phase. Faris Belt is a visual artist whose work studies relationships between humankind and the more than human world, influenced by nature writers, a unique multicultural heritage, Buddhist philosophy, and a lifetime spent in nature. She uses photographic media because its physical makeup mirrors nature itself, sensitivity to light, energy, and time, metallic and chemical interactions, viability, and exploration, and its inherent ability to simultaneously record and infer. Her work utilizes the entire range of photographic media, from historic to digital, media is chosen to underscore or mirror the concepts regarding nature in each body of work. Angela's work has been exhibited in prestigious juried invitational exhibitions across the country, and her work is held in collections including the Crown Collection, Chicago, and the Smithsonian Museum, and she's represented by Michael Warren Contemporary Gallery in Denver. Her work is actually in the exhibition courtesy of Michael Warren Contemporary, and they are just dreams to work with. She lives in the mountains of Colorado's Front Range alongside neighbors of elk, deer, fox, coyote, bears, and mountain lions. In addition to her artwork, she is program chair of the studio art and art history departments at Arapahoe Community College. And in her off time, she builds stone walls and participates in bark beetle mitigation efforts. Natascha Seideneck is from Germany, grew up in England, and lives in Denver. She holds an MFA from Tufts University and is currently an associate professor of art at Metro State University, Denver. Has produced numerous site-specific artworks, often collaborating with artists, designers, and architects. Her work is interdisciplinary, often engaging in experimental processes that integrate still and time-based visual techniques. In particular, she's interested in how land is surveyed and surveilled within historical and contemporary contexts. And last but not least, Melanie Walker. Melanie has been a practicing artist for over 50 years. Her expertise is in a mixed media art. Her expertise is in a mixed media artist invested in ideas. She has exhibited her work both nationally and internationally, has work in more than 200 permanent collections, including the Smithsonian, Los Angeles County Museum of Art, San Francisco Museum of Modern Art, Center for Fine Art Photography, it's the Center for Creative Photography in Houston. We actually have a piece of hers in our collection as well. Her approach to materials includes photographic media, alternative processes, digital art, sculpture, installation, fiber art, printmaking, costume design, and public art. She has received numerous grants and fellowships, including a National Endowment for the Arts Fellowship, Colorado Council on the Arts Fellowship, and Polaroid Materials grants, and an Aaron Siskin Award. And I would just like to add to that Melanie recently retired from 40 years in education. Is that right, Melanie?
48.
48 years in higher education.
And I'm calling it rewirement.
In what?
And I'm calling it rewirement.
Oh, rewirement. I love that term. That's so great. Okay, so Natascha, are you set to go, or Bailey, have we worked that out? Great. All right. So if you look at the exhibition, you can actually see on our website, you can see on the center's website, you can see the images and some installation images. And the exhibition really starts at the ground, looking at the ground, looking at the horizon and the trees, and then looking at the sky. And so Natascha is going to start, and where her work is more sort of based at the ground and water. So Natascha, it's all yours.
Okay, Bailey's going to share her screen because I couldn't, so it might be a little funky, but I'll just tell you next. Maybe put on the, there we go. Perfect, Bailey. Thank you so much. And I want to say thank you, Hamida, for inviting me to this show. And also thank you to Bailey and Douglas and Katie Kindle and the beautiful installation that you made from my work. And also the Loveland Artworks. It was really a pleasant place to be and install. I'm honored to share the space also with Melanie and Angela. So for this talk, I just thought, since we only have 10 minutes, I just do a quick introduction to my work and then talk about the inspirations that I had making this work. And in my art practice, I'm interested in process of fracturing, remaking, contextualizing landscapes as representations of imagined territory, and emulating the mediation of the technological lens as a site of surveyed and surveilled, creating fictionalized space between time and sight. Next slide, please. Conceptually, I seek to question our present ecological imperialism by portraying photography's relationship to scientific seeing, by mimicking satellite, microscope, and telescope perspectives to encourage divergent thinking about the planet that we live on. And what you see here is just a process image of how I create some of my work. Next slide, please. The work in the exhibition is part of an ongoing series called Uncanny Territory, which depicts fictitious topographies of Earth to generate, or hopefully generate, a dialogue about ecological disaster. And this particular image is just an image of water, frozen water, ice, and oil, and photographed. Next slide, please. And then this image is also just another example of some of the landscapes I've created before. This is just painted mylar, and what you see in the middle is it looks like a boat, but it's just a leaf. And so just using natural light and not really using any manipulation or anything like that, except for Bailey, if you click on one more time, it should turn into an animation. Yeah, so I like to create these still lives, and then sometimes I'll create animations. So that's some of my previous work. Next slide, please. Last summer, I had the privilege of traveling to Morocco for a Fulbright seminar and Portugal for an artist residency. And that's where a lot of these ideas that manifested in this exhibition came from. My recent rendition of the series involves different techniques and commentary. Instead of constructing finding landscapes, I have been finding them and deconstructing them. I was inspired by these beautiful tide pools, and this is in Casablanca in the Atlantic Ocean. And at first glance, you know, they were just beautiful formations, but then I noticed that there was a lot of debris and trash. In particular, I thought that was interesting, the basket on the left-hand corner of the image. And it made me start thinking about like where these things come from and noticing wherever I went. Next slide, please. I feel like the objects that you found on this beach, I started thinking of how it reflects our societies, histories, mass production, and capitalism. I'm drawn to the subject matter from an environmental standpoint, but also fascinated how these objects circulate globally and how did they get there? Next slide, please. Then I did an artist residency in Lisbon, Portugal, and anyone that's ever been there will know it's a very beautiful place, very touristy, but very picturesque. But this is the shores of the Tigris River. And I noticed all these different debris and objects. And just a little bit about the Tigris River. It's a slow flowing waters, and they're fundamental to Lisbon's early prosperity and are the reason that it was established as a significant Roman port. The natural estuary provides protection from the fierce Atlantic Ocean while still allowing easy access for large ships. For many years, the river Tigris have been continuously polluted. The present state of affairs is posing quite a serious danger to the survival of the river ecosystem and the health of the people living along the waterside. And some of the objects I found interesting, there's this package on the upper right corner, which it says vegan, and just thinking about like healthy lifestyles and how we just continuously produce, you know, all this trash, and really noticing the natural and the unnatural elements kind of inside these landscapes. Next slide, please. And this is just a Google map of where the river comes in, and it goes all the way through Spain. Next slide, please. And sort of another detail of the debris on the shores. You can see like shells, and you can see also plastic, what you would expect to see. But then also some unexpected things like, you know, like fake teeth and things like that. And a lot of COVID tests, which is obviously very telling about how you know, our world today. Next slide, please. And I also noticed that I thought it was fabric, but if you see, so these are the objects that I started feeling like they were these ready-mades that I could see within the shores, and how the artificial and the natural sort of blended to make these like almost sculptural pieces. Um, and I started noticing what I thought was fabric, and the top left with the greenery, you can kind of see it. I thought it was fabric, but I recently learned it's actually pollution from a paper making factory up the river, and they bleach paper like paper we write on, and so there's a lot of pollution from that factory. And so this is kind of where the series started. I just started photographing these very sculptural elements. Next slide, please. And this is what you see in the exhibition. Basically I just took those objects and removed all the sand around, but I left them intact, so I didn't alter them in any other way, but just isolate them. Next slide, please. And then this is some details of what is actually inside. So you see the sand, you see all kinds of like bottle caps, plastics, and also fishing supplies and things like that. Next slide, please. And so, you know, they started kind of looking like topography to me, and I have in my art practice, I tend to create like almost like satellite views. I'm always interested in looking down on things. And so when you see them, and they, you know, they're quite large, and a lot of people have said they start looking like islands and landscapes. Okay, next slide, please. This is a courtesy of Bailey, beautiful installation shots of the space. Next slide, please. And then that piece on the wall, that's actually like a lot of that what like pulp pollution is made up of. Kind of looks like a monster to me in a way. And then on the edges is a sculptural element and that I made from images of the trash that I found on the river. Next slide. And then there's also these sort of scroll-like images, and these are another typography of sorts. It's a still life that I made collecting Dietrichs from the streets of Denver, and then I capture with my panoramic function on my phone, and kind of allowing for glitches and abstractions. And then next slide, please. So this is sort of a detail of that landscape, and if you hit one more time, Bailey, it'll animate a little bit. So I really enjoy making, you know, still lifes into animations. And you kind of see some of the objects in there, like there's all kinds of building materials and you know, just things I find on the street that have been discarded. Next slide, please. Other elements in this series that I'm working on, and more concerning the regeneration part of the title, because there's not much regeneration in the images that I've shown in the exhibition, but it's still a work in progress. I'm experimenting with sculptural forms that incorporate live elements inspired by the natural world and its powers and possible collaborations with the human world. I'm really particularly fascinated with fungi and also like lichens that are so ancient and trap particulate matter in the air like dust, while also absorbing smaller pollutants like sulfur, mercury, nitrogen. And it's like some of the oldest organisms in the world. Next slide. Yeah, thank you. Another ongoing body of work that I think really relates to the work in the exhibition is it's called Past and Present Futures, and it's sort of an archive of objects from the Anthropocene. Some of them, so they're objects in these gloss, kind of scientific gloss things, and they are physical representation of things that are actual. Well, some of them are not actual, but there's one particular image, I mean the one in the middle, and is a physical representation of goat spider silk, which is scientists have developed a fiber-based material made of the recombined of spider silk-like protein extracted from the milk of genetically engineered goats. True story. And a material stronger than Kevlar and stretchier than nylon. And then also there's a representation of caterpillars that eat plastic. So just in terms of regeneration, in hopes that within nature there are things that we can collaborate with in terms of trying to create, a better environment. Next slide. This is the last slide, and you can hit it again, Bailey. Through this is an animation. Through experimental photography, my work hopes to uncover the hidden beauty in the aftermath of destruction, the resilience of life in the wake of ruin, and the power of regeneration. I'm particularly focused on how the natural environment has been shaped and reshaped by human activity, and how places can become uncanny and uncanny places can become home. Thank you.
That was fantastic. I love that. I want to hear after everyone finishes. I have to hear more about the goat spider web. That just okay. So, Angela, it's your turn.
Really, thank you to Hamida Center for Fine Art Photography. Thank you to Artwork Loveland for putting on the show. Michael Warren Contemporary, obviously, great gallery, wonderful guys. And it was really pretty wonderful to collaborate with you, Hamida, and with Natascha and Melanie on this project. I find it pretty interesting how we all deal with our relationship with the natural world, which I call the more than human world, which I'll talk about kind of later on. But while Natascha is more sort of kind of palpably, tangibly focused on ecological concerns and like those tangible sorts of aspects of our relationship, especially now in the Anthropocene. Mine is sort of more psychological, spiritual. And I'll share my screen, I think. There we go. Am I sharing?
Yes, you are. It looks great.
Yeah. Okay, great. So here, I'll start with a few installation views. This is the body of work that Hamida had requested for this exhibition, Vestiges. And they're photographs of a stand of bristlecone pine that I found very early on when I moved to Colorado in the early 2000s, 2003 to 2004. And I visited those trees, that particular stand of bristlecone, over and over again, sort of like you would visit a sage or a really spiritual sort of event. I really struggled to find a way to photograph them, and I took plenty of snapshots of them, plenty of images that were made with a digital camera, and all the while thinking that I couldn't find a way to really represent the fact that these trees are 1,400 years old and are finally dying. They are succumbing to a fungus that was introduced on loggers' equipment inadvertently, but that whole inadvertent aspect, in our discussion later, I'll talk about as well. It wasn't until I came across a case of expired Polaroid type 665 film that gives you a negative as well as a positive that I realized how I wanted to image these trees. The film had expired in 1986, and the Polaroid had stopped manufacturing it by the early 2000s. So I felt as though the film itself had something in common with the trees, right? It's after its sort of lifespan, but we can still see it, enjoy it, be there with it. So I kept going into the landscape and photographing with this camera. Oftentimes, like images like this, I would pull the negative and it would be a positive. And so when you reverse the image, it looks like this, it's a negative. if I had sort of a quote fail like this, which I didn't consider a fail, I was always excited to do something like this, I would make a second image so that I could actually see what was happening. So to talk a little bit about that process, I'm trying to escape out of here, but can't seem to. There I go. To sort of into that process a bit, I'll show a brief video in just a second. The age of the film is really what created the look that I felt represented that ancient grove of trees. And I'm trying to exit out of Lightroom actually, so. Which I'm not able to do. So I'll stop sharing for just a second. And go back to sharing. So I'll kind of stop here in the middle and show a video. It's about 4 minutes. It was made in conjunction with a solo show that I had with the exhibition at Michael Warren. And it'll kind of give us a respite from images and talking as well. So. Just to sort of give you a sense of the landscape that I'm working within and the weather patterns. It's very windy all the time. It's above, right at the tree line. Basically, they're at the very top. And this grove of trees, you can see some are already gone. Some are still here. Even the ones that are still look as they're thriving will go through a very long process of deterioration where we and probably the next generation can enjoy them, but they are in the process of leaving. So this film, the Polaroid Type 65, you need to bring chemistry with you and develop it in the field. And I used 2 vintage cameras that were my grandfather's cameras, and would get a little Polaroid print. But in order to have a negative, you need to clear it in a sodium sulfide solution and then wash them. The snowmobiles are just out of sight of the camera. I did go up there. This video is courtesy of Circe Baumgartner, who's a really great videographer, photographer. And we enlisted some friends with snowmobiles to get us up there in the winter time because I really wanted to see the landscape. It's so windy that at the very top it can't even hold snow. Even though the snow that we had reversed was as deep as 15 to 18 feet. So. So it was a physical feat to actually pull it off And at the same time, there were some arduous physical days. Um, at the same time, I was really concerned with preserving the landscape. So I made sure that I had tarps and cloths and, protecting the landscape from even a drop of chemical. So this was like pulling prints for that exhibition. Um, the grain of the film is really pretty marvelous. And one of the things that I really enjoy about the film is that in drum scanning it, I'll go back to some of these kind of larger, in drum scanning the images, the pixels are smaller than the grain of film itself. And so I was able to, even in quite a large print, actually show the texture and the nature of the film, that sort of decay that happened beyond the film's expiration date. And some of those sort of like this one, those quintessential, quote fails that happen when you're dealing with Polaroid film. So some of the trees, like this one, for instance, how you can tell that it's halfway through that dying process. Images like these, where the film has reticulated at the edges, where there's sort of a secondary ghosted image, that quite honestly to me makes no sense. Again, like getting a positive out of a negative, which really made no sense as well. But that was the nature of the expired film that I was dealing with. And it was a journey for me. While I'm making work, the media always has something to do with what I'm trying to say about the land. This was a 2.5, 3-year project. And while this project was going on, I was also flying back and forth to Ohio to care for my mother, who was also going through her own process of dying. And so that kind of idea that, film has a very sort of short shelf life. We have an intermediate shelf life, if you want to call it that. And that the trees, these bristle cones, have a much longer lifespan. And that we do, as indicated here, we hold on, right? We cling to the land, we cling to life. Cost. So that's sort of where this body of work came in. And let's see here. If I stop the share, talk for just a minute. So that's sort of where this body of work came to be. And for me, it was interesting sort of working with the three of us, because we each are working on the same sorts of ideas or concepts, but at very different sort of levels in terms of tangibility, spirit, in terms of reality, or our conception of what's happening with the land. In terms of vestiges, it sort of got me on a road thinking less tangibly about the landscape itself and more so about existence as a whole. And sort of new work that I'm working on is sort of headed more in that direction, but also still using photographs of the land. But these images are pretty substantial in terms of my own practice, because they really do epitomize that idea that photography itself and its rootedness in light and time and chemistry and viability, those are all the things that all existence has to do with. And so with Heir of the Ancients, it sort of made sense that all of that is connected. So that's sort of what I have for you all at the moment.
Thank you. That was so fascinating seeing you behind the scenes, and I just love to hear about your process as well. So thank you for that. Melanie Walker, are you ready?
Yes, I am. I would like to echo my compatriots in thanking Hamida for including me in this exhibition. I'm really stunned with how poetic and beautiful both of your presentations have been. It's been a pleasure exhibiting with both of you. And I also wanted to thank Artworks for allowing us to use your space for the exhibition. So I'm going to share my screen, if I can get it to work. And I'll go straight into, oops. Okay, slideshow. Okay, so my favorite way of working is making immersive installations. And I've been doing this since I did my thesis exhibition decades ago. I'm not going to say what year because it's embarrassing, but I've always been really fascinated with the prehistory of photography. I grew up in an environment where I was surrounded by photography. My grandfather was part of the team that made the first sound studios in Hollywood. And my father was a photographer. Early on in my life, he had to do Chevy ads and things like that in order to support the family. So I was frequently a fake child in fake family scenarios that were, you know, in national magazines and things like that. So I grew up with kind of a skewed idea of what photography was. For me, so much of it was about fiction. And I know photography has long been associated with other mediums. And for me, I guess it's always been most related to the idea of theater. The image is the stage, and I've always been interested in questioning the idea of what goes on off frame or what's taking place off stage. So that's sort of been part of my modus operandi with my work. I've also been completely infatuated with the prehistory of photography and the notion of the diorama that one of the people who was claimed to be the inventor of photography incorporated, Louis Daguerre. So he created these immersive theater experiences for people. And that's been sort of my interest with doing installation work. I like breaking down the idea of the theater or the stage and putting people inside of the image. So this project is called Beneath the Sheltering Sky. And it was sort of a nod to a novel that was written by Paul Bowles the year that I was born. It's a novel about alienation and despair, which seemed to be fitting feelings during the pandemic. I went through a lot of, you know, really deep emotions during that time, particularly with the idea of all the losses that we were experiencing. These are some of the views of the installation at Artworks right now. I was really infatuated with what happened with the lighting and the idea of the circle. And the circle was sort of intentional with this project. I found myself during the pandemic going out daily. It became kind of a ritual to go out and watch the sky every day. So I started making images, and then I realized I had almost a year's worth of images, and I was trying to figure out what to do with them. And I'm also involved in the kite world. There's a whole funny family of people from all over the world who meet periodically, and we go fly kites as an excuse to watch the sky. So I decided to take these images and turn them into kite forms. These won't actually fly. It's using the materials of kites. So each of the images is framed with a really thin piece of bamboo. And the images are dipped in wax because I wanted the image to appear on both sides of the material. That kind of harkens back to the history of photography, because some of the earliest images that were made on paper, and then the paper was oiled and waxed. So that's sort of the motivation that I was thinking about. I also was thinking about that shape in terms of the natural shape of the photographic image. When light passes through a lens, it's actually a circular image. So it's just that the lens plane has given us the rectangle for photography. So that was another thing I was thinking about. I was also thinking about the shape of the earth and the atmosphere that surrounds it, which is also spherical or round, as well as the symbol for oxygen in the periodic chart, which is the O. So I've always been a sky watcher, and I've always been drawn to the ephemeral nature of clouds. And I think clouds are a vehicle for viewing our atmosphere and making something that's invisible visible. So that was part of what I was thinking about. I have this theory, actually my partner, George Peters, and I have talked about this extensively, that we have this idea that clouds are actually the manifestation of the breath of all of the ancestors throughout time. So everything evaporates and goes into the air, and the clouds are a way of seeing that breath. I'm going to shift over to reading some things that have been inspired by one of my favorite books that came out a couple of years ago. That's called The Life of Plants, A Metaphysics of Mixology. And a lot of it is about breath and plants, and how plants basically created the atmosphere that we all breathe. And the air that we breathe now has been with us since the beginning of the planet, or the beginning of the plants that started creating the atmosphere. So life is breath, and we're all connected. Our shared atmosphere. Every living being constructs itself starting from the same matter that makes up the mountains and the clouds, materiality connected to the matter of the world. The world is the matter, the form, the space, and the reality of breath. Breath is a mixture of atmosphere. Breath is the art of mixture and atmosphere. The sphere of breath is a form of intimacy and unity that defines itself through the sharing of the same breath. Plants are the breathing of all living things. Any breath is evidence of the fact that being in the world is fundamentally an experience of immersion. To breathe means to be plunged into a medium that penetrates us in the same way and with the same intensity that we penetrate it. It's a symbiotic relationship. Breath is the first activity of all living beings. To live is to breathe and embrace in one's being all of the matter of the world. We are of this process over the years. I have a tendency to make metaphors and allegories in order to understand things. My work is what I turn to in order to come to terms with the ideas that seem incomprehensible. It's difficult making work about the environment, but through my grief, I try to remind myself and anyone else who will look that we live on an incredible planet, a green world on a blue earth. It's important to pay attention and care for not just ourselves and our families, but all living things, because we're all connected through our shared breath. I was raised to leave the planet better than I found it, or to leave things better than I found it. And even though it's a seemingly monumental task, I've tried to do my part. Images, and then I'll end with a little walkthrough of another installation that I did using these same pieces. And I wanted to say these are probably the most literal photographs I've ever presented. I usually tend to get my hands in there and mix things up, but for this project, I wanted to be, a lot more representational of what I was thinking about and of the sky. And thank you.
Thank you, Melanie. That was lovely.
Thank you.
I have that book. I'm going to have to read it now.
It's amazing.
Yeah. So that was really wonderful to hear from everyone. I had a few questions, just in terms of your work is, again, similar, but also obviously very different. The question I was going to ask Melanie was, that the title of the show came from your piece. And I was going to ask you to talk about that more, but you actually did talk about that in terms of the breath of the ancestors, which I thought was really interesting. Is there more you'd like to say about that, Melanie? And then I'd love to hear from Angela and Natascha about how that sort of fits in with their work, that idea, the air of the ancients.
I think Beneath the Sheltering Sky is just something that seemed fitting for what we're going through. I don't know, I read a lot of science fiction when I was a kid, and I never imagined that we would be going through something like the pandemic that some people say it's over. I don't think it's over yet. So, but I don't know, sort of that sense of shelter and comfort seemed to resonate with me. That title has always stuck with me, of that book. It's an amazing novel. I know films have been based on it as well, but I just wanted to borrow that title and use it for this piece.
Yeah. I actually have read that book several times, and I loved it as well. Although I've also heard some very interesting critiques of the idea in terms of it being problematic.
Yes, very much.
Yeah, which is a whole other conversation. But yeah, and the movie with I almost said Deborah Harry, Deborah Winger was really good too. So Angela and Natasha, I'd love to hear from you about that idea, Heir of the Ancients, and how that fits.
For me, and I thought about, I did think about the title of Melanie's piece, and I had read that novel years ago, and I wondered about that connotation, what the sheltering sky could mean. And I feel far more connected with Melanie's interpretation than the novel. But on some level, a lot of my work comes from this idea that, this sort of alienation and despair that occurs, and it's been years since I've read the novel, but that occurs in that novel. I feel we're living that now because of our self-imposed separation from the natural world. We are really designed, human beings are designed to live in reciprocity with nature, which is why I sort of live where I live. I'm not sure how this sounds, but sort of the further away I live from densely populated human environments, the more in touch with my own humanity I feel. And to make my work, I'm always in nature or have my hands in nature or somehow having a reciprocal relationship with that, whether it's the landscape or a single tree or whatever. I do feel as though that despair, that sort of existential angst we're feeling, is because we've lost sight of that reciprocal relationship. And it's a little terrifying in that we as humans we don't respect, we don't protect those things which we do not know intimately. And we cannot replace direct phenomenological experience of nature with zoos, botanic gardens, and screen time. So the more we are solely engaged with only human and technological existence, the less in tune we are with nature. So it's a bit of a predicament, I think, that we find ourselves in. And so I think that a lot of our problems globally and individually come from that sort of disconnection from nature, from where we're supposed to be.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's interesting. I mean, I feel like the pandemic definitely, young people seemed to be more interested in nature because, that was the place that, you could go outside. And so I see that people are trying to reconnect with nature. I don't know. I've never read The Sheltering Sky, so I can't talk about that. But it's interesting because I feel the same way. Like I always watch the sky. Like I always say, if things are bad or like you're having a hard, you just look up because it's just it's so much bigger than anything. I see it as it's like almost like a escape just to look up and go, we're really small actually, and my problems are small. But I think, just Angela talking about like, the way that you live in nature and how that, puts you closer to yourself, basically. I mean, I grew up in a very rural area, but now I'm in the city. I've been living in the city and kind of consider myself a city girl, although I have that country at heart. But so I think my work is really like looking at the way that, nature and and man sort of lives simultaneously in like what it produces sometimes, like, you know, the things like when I was saying objects of the Anthropocene, it's like things that are created or have been created because of, you know, current situation, which is, you know, pretty dismal. And I think the ready-mades kind of look like artifacts, and they kind of look ancient in themselves. And if I wanted to get really cynical about it, and which, you know, you hate to do with the environment, but a lot of the things that I imaged, you know, are like they're gonna be ancient, right? Because plastic stays around for a long time, and you know, certainly like, you know, nuclear waste and all the other things, they will be ancient because they will show up in like, you know, the geology of the future. So I feel like all of our work relates in an interesting way, because it's almost like, you know, the ancient trees, and then I see the sky as like the present, you know, like it makes you present. And then my work is more like kind of the future, you know, in a sense.
Mhm. Mhm.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. You know, I think are there any questions from the audience before I continue? Any questions from the audience online or at Artworks Loveland?
We have settings on for someone to have to request to unmute, so I would say maybe put questions in the chat if that's possible.
Okay, perfect. Thank you, Bailey. Sarah, did you have a?
I
You're
can't.
muted.
Oh,
Yeah.
there we go. No, we have about 8 people here, which is nice. And everybody's been really enjoying everything that you have to say, but no questions here.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you. So one of the things actually sort of, I think Melanie was talking about this, you know, making work about the environment, which you've all been doing for a long time, is really heavy work. And I'm curious how you balance, well, I think, you know, Melanie, with your kites and, you know, like you also have I feel like a lot of your work is very playful. So, but I'm curious how, as artists, all of you are dealing with such heavy topics and spending so much time on these projects and so much time in research and theory and all of those kinds of things. How do you manage working on such heavy topics and not letting it sort of overcome you?
I can
I can
start
maybe
with
throw-
that.
okay.
You go ahead, Natascha.
It is, you know, I feel like, I mean, for those of you who have known my work, you know, over the years, it's like, you know, I feel like I used to have a much darker side to it. You know, I had the disaster archive and I had all this, and it did, like, after the pandemic, I did start thinking about like, you know, I don't want to just talk about devastation, and I don't, you know, so I started getting really interested in like, you know, like what's changing, because it is changing and it's going to change and we're never going to go back to the same. We can't have a standstill. So like really doing research about organisms that, you know, could help our environment. And, you know, that's why I'm like super fascinated by things like mushrooms and lichen and, you know, things like that, because they kind of give me hope, you know. And I'm teaching an environmental art class, and you know, it's real heavy and we talk about real heavy stuff, but I have like this folder called hopeful stories, and I'll pull them out. I'm like, okay, today we have to have, you know, did you know that the scientists have discovered a caterpillar that eats plastics and they're trying to develop, you know, so it's looking at the sciences, you know, that are progressing. And I like subscribe to the science blog, so that every day, not every day, but most days I get stories, and there's so many amazing inventions happening as well, you know. So that's how I try to balance it out, because it can, you know, like Melanie was saying, that's a real thing, right? We have this grief environment, or grief, a response to what's happening, and how do we, you know, ease ourselves and feel at peace. And maybe that is like being in nature, you know, and maybe sometimes it's tuning out, but honestly, like, you know, I love researching, but like making the art is so therapeutic for me.
Mhm.
And you know, when I get to create like one of my little tiny landscapes, you know, that are, I mean, they are sort of toxic landscapes, so they're really pretty at the same time. But then when I get into making those, I almost feel like I transform. Like my brain is there, like it's a place, you know, that I created. And it really started during the pandemic because like we couldn't travel, couldn't go anywhere. So I almost felt like I was creating them to escape and to be somewhere else. And it feels very immersive when I'm in the process of making them. So, you know, making art is always makes me feel better.
I like that, you know, you talk about sort of playful things, and, you know, I do sort of have to wonder sometimes, like, is my glass half empty? I don't know. You know, like I really, because we are grappling with things that are big and important. And you say things like, you know, on sort of a playful, hopeful level, like, you know, oh, they're making a caterpillar or an algae or whatever that eats plastic. And I'm like, okay, so we're gonna like be taken over by plastics or like algae and caterpillars that are plastic eating because we want to keep getting away with using all of this like plastic, like, and like what's going to happen when we're overrun with the caterpillars, because, you know, like it's just going to be like a blanket. People are going to make art about blankets of caterpillars. You know, so we grapple with these heavy topics. I have a hard time, you know, I try to keep it in perspective. At the same time, I think every artist has to make work that's true to their calling as an artist, right? And some people make, you know, just pretty landscapes, and there is totally a place for that, and you know, that's true to their calling. I grapple with ideas of life and death, of age, what we're made of, and our relationship with the more than human world. And I do call it that. That comes actually from a book, a fantastic book I would recommend to anyone interested in nature, by a phenomenologist and philosopher named David Abram. And the book is called The Spell of the Sensuous. And it's about language and linguistic adaptation from the natural world, where language evolved from our connection, reciprocal connection with nature. But, you know, as well, I feel like as an artist, indigenous cultures, tribal cultures had a shaman or a healer or a medicine person. And that person's sort of role within those societies was as a bridge between the more than human world, the natural world, and the humans in that community or village. And I feel like as artists who grapple with these things on some level, our job is to be that bridge for people who might not be considering these things and their individual connection to nature. So, you know, if by looking at my work and reading about it and understanding that nature can get move one person to understand their relationship with nature and how important it is for us to really come back into balance, then it, you know, my work here is done, you know. So so that for me, that's how I kind of deal with those kinds of issues.
Mm-hmm.
And Angela, all matter has volume, so your glass is full all the time, as is everyone's.
Indeed. I'm just imagining a caterpillar world. I don't. Natascha just got me going. I'm like, I just
Now you got me going.
of
Now I'm-
plastic eating caterpillars.
Well, and then the plastic eating caterpillars with the goat spider web, whatever that was. I don't.
Indeed.
Wait, Angela, will you do me a favor? Will you put the title of that book in the chat,
Mhm.
please?
Mhm.
That sounded really interesting.
Yeah, it's a great book. And I guess for me, I mean, I think the way that I work is a little bit similar to Natascha with her models that she was making. I've always had a tendency to turn to my work when I'm having a hard time understanding something that's going on in the world, and I tend to make little models so that I can come to terms with what's going on. And yeah, despair and grief are always at the center of what I'm doing when I'm doing work about environmental issues, which has been most of my work. But I also try to bring humor into it and something that's lighthearted, because I think it's disarming. The issues that we're facing in terms of what's going on with the planet are just so overwhelming. And I've always kind of believed that humor is a way to disarm people and invite them in. So, I mean, I think I've long been misunderstood in terms of what I'm doing with my work, but it's important for me to make it accessible to people so that they aren't so terrified and overwhelmed by what's going on.
Yeah. Yeah, I get that. That
I
makes-
like the idea that like Angela was saying, and I've been thinking about a lot, it's like artist as translator, because I do feel like, some people have like this, a different vision. We see things differently, and just seeing things that maybe other people don't see, not, to say that maybe everybody sees it, I don't know, but, and also that kind of bringing awareness to it, like I'm not making any activist art really, it's very expressionist, but, hopefully I'm always hoping that, to bring something to the table where someone will go, oh, I hadn't thought of that, or I hadn't seen that, in very little ways. So kind of translating what's happening.
Yeah, that makes sense. That I feel like that makes sense. I think that's often the role of the artist. So let's see. So we have a comment. Danja, I believe I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that correctly, but says, I don't have a question, or rather I have many, but would like to comment that the confluence of humanness, animalness, naturalness, and all the permutations the triad provide is so astoundingly present in each of the artist's work. Which I agree with. That's lovely. It's a lovely word.
Can I steal that for an artist statement? No.
Yeah, right. Natascha,
Yeah, why not?
One of the things that you all were touching on then in terms of like having an impact is how many people are able to walk a beach or walk a neighborhood or walk a park and ignore the trash. Literally, I mean, we sort of are getting to a point where many people just don't see it. I'm in a habit because I have but national forest land and hike quite a lot, and I carry a bag with me. I just carry a bag because I know, there's my own flotsam out there, that the people's stuff, it just kind of blows around, and I pick it up as I go. It does sort of disturb that being in nature and that, but at the same time, it's a responsibility, right, that we have if we're going to participate in the natural world to say, not going to just ignore it while I walk around, going to be part of the solution, I hope, right? So your images do remind me of that, of, how do we become so separated that we don't really see it anymore, right?
Or we see it as someone else's responsibility, right? That's somebody else's trash. That's not my trash. Which is an interesting idea, that, sort of governmental, we as, I say we, like a lot of people assume that it's, governmental responsibility, not not individuals. But yeah, very interesting. Is there anything
there's a,
else?
sorry.
No,
Can I
no,
say
please
something?
go ahead, Natascha.
There's the Platte River. There's they've been really changing the Platte River. They're letting part of it kind of rewild, which is really beautiful. There's a section where it's like you feel like you're in the forest, and they do like river pick. They do go and there's a One Water One World program at Metro, and they go with students and fish all the trash out of the Platte, and they're trying to like really beautify it, so it's really nice to see those kinds of like community things happening. And actually Denver's a fairly clean city compared to some cities, and I'm gonna have to go back to Portugal to clean up that little cove.
But I think that is one role of art, right? Is to bring up around that level of awareness, so where it's like, it's not other people's, it's me. I'm here now in the present, in this natural space. Like, I think that can be a really positive outcome of these kinds of exhibitions, of connecting people, making more palpable our reciprocal relationship, right? I think those are the positive outcomes, that someone else starts carrying a bag, or joins a group that kind of picks up trash, or what have you, right? A movement to use less plastic, use reusable beeswax wrappers on your leftovers instead of one single-use plastic all the time, things like that.
Right.
Yeah, or even being mindful of entering into an environment. I mean, we talked about the pandemic before. A pandemic, we've provided almost 8 billion hosts for this to spread, so we've made it really easy. I think that on that same level, we can provide hosts for positive change, right?
Yeah. Well, wow, my light here is very challenging.
Cinematic.
Yeah, I feel like I should have some sort of crazy music going on. Well, I just want to say thank you all for being here. I really thank Angela and Melanie and Natascha for the work, not only the work that you make, but agreeing to be a part of this exhibition. It's really it's such beautiful and meaningful work. I'm really just delighted to have it. And I would love to give Sarah a chance to talk a little, just to say a few words. Are you still there? There you are. The forever, like figuring out how to unmute or mute. Yep.
Okay, I'm unmuted, but I lost the screen, but you guys can see me.
Oh yeah.
Okay, great. Well, thank you so much, everyone. Thanks for everyone who has zoomed in. For all of you here, I really appreciate that. And Hamida, thank you so much. This is year 4 of our collaboration, and I see many more years ahead of us. It's just, you bring in just the most amazing work. Angela, Natascha, and Melanie, we've been so fortunate to live with your work for the last few months. I can't believe it's coming to a close already, but we still have till April 1st. So I hope that some of you out there who have not been able to see the show in person can come and see it. Really being in the space, it's a whole other experience. So definitely very, very important to come see it if you can. And this has just been a fabulous talk. I'm going to give one little quick shameless plug, couple of shameless plugs about artworks. Our South Gallery, we do have an artist, Shelby Shadwell. His artist talk will be on the 25th in person here at Artworks. So if you're in the area, please come to that. And also this fall, we're putting together really an art and cultural event honoring contemporary Indigenous art, food, music, dance, fashion, all of it. So sign up for our newsletter. We are looking for donations for that for this fall, as we are also a 501c3 nonprofit. So, but again, to the artist and Hamida, I just can't thank you enough. And I'm so excited to see what next year brings. So thank you very much.
You bet. Thank you. All right, everyone, we're going to go ahead and close the evening. Again, thank you so much. And we will see you at one of our upcoming talks or events or something.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank
so
you.
much.
Bye.